Hello, good evening and welcome to Kingston University, St George's, University of London, Conversation with Paula Mcgowan. And we really warmly welcome you to this prestigious event. Firstly, I have to say, if there is a bell that sounds like a fire alarm, it is not a test, it's a real fire alarm. So I just have to remind people that we have to evacuate the building. This is the culmination of 100 years of learning disability nursing, and for Kingston St George's this is an absolutely superb way to tie the year of celebrations up. We're very honoured to have Paula to be with us for the event this evening. We had about 200 student nurses, first year student nurses this morning at Kingston University who were absolutely struck on what Paula had to say, and we were watching their faces and their faces were absolutely amazing. It went in, they thought about it, and they're going to hopefully take that forward and change. So one thing I would like to say to you as well is outside where you registered there are some little wooden pledge boards that we want you to write a pledge on, if you've not done already, that you are going to pledge as a result of the 100 years of learning disability nursing, but also what you're going to do in the memory of Oliver and others that sadly have been in a similar situation. So they're little pledge boards and they're going to go up at Kingston Hill. They've got a place of honour at the university so that everyone will be able to read those pledges, and we're going to take those forward. I'd like to introduce to you now Martina Gomez, who is our learning disability second year student nurse, but is also President and Chair of the Kingston University St George's Nursing Society. So, Martina.
Thanks, Trish. Forgive me with my piece of paper, but otherwise I won't remember it all. So I'm a second year learning disability nursing student at Kingston, and I'm the chair of the Nursing Society. It's a huge privilege and pleasure to welcome you all here tonight with this collaboration between Kingston University, St George's University of London and the Faculty of the Nursing Society. Like you, I've been inspired by Paula's story, and I'm so pleased that we've been able to offer her two platforms today. Firstly, with the first year nursing students this morning, which was across all four fields of nursing, but also to be able to make this public event available to you all this evening. We are always mindful of our audience, and while we acknowledge and welcome many friendly and familiar faces, we were keen to place this event close to a clinical care delivery as possible to make it accessible to as many frontline healthcare professionals. Aligned with this, we would ask each and every one of you to introduce yourselves to someone that you don't know before you go home this evening. It's a unique opportunity for developing your network or community to have an impact on health outcomes for people with learning disabilities and their families. To that end, I am pleased to introduce Paula to share her experience of health and healthcare for her son Oliver, and how we might improve healthcare for people with learning disabilities and autism, and to hear Paula's perspective on the plans contained in the Department of Health and Social Care's report, Mandatory Training for All Healthcare Professionals, announced by Matt Hancock, Health and Social Care Secretary, on the 5th of November. Thank you. Paula.
Irrespective of whether you've got autism and learning disabilities, you have the right to the same level of healthcare outcomes as everybody else. Oliver was great fun. He was just full of life. He was an absolute joy and pleasure to be around. Oliver has high-functioning autism, which made his autism not always obvious to people that didn't know him. They started to speak in medical jargon. They all spoke over him, so he was sat down and they were stood up over him. and they made the situation far worse by making him more frightened. Sadly, Oliver has made it very clear in A&E and in the ambulance that he was not to be given antipsychotics because they made his brain go funny and his eyes go up. And we said that ourselves over and over again to all medical doctors, nurses, that he was not to be given those medications. Words that were used were, his brain is so badly swollen, it's coming out the base of his skull. So I just sat down one day and I just thought to myself, well, actually, what was the catalyst of Oliver's death? And it was clear and simple that the medics didn't understand autism and learning disabilities. We can't expect doctors and nurses to suddenly know how to do these things if they've never had the training. To me, that's not acceptable and it's unreasonable. Things have to change. We need equality for all people. And, you know, irrespective of whether you've got autism and learning disabilities, you have the right to the same level of healthcare outcomes as everybody else.
Good evening, everybody, and first can I say thank you for taking your time up to come and hear a little bit about Oliver and who Oliver was. Before I start, I would like to reassure every single one of you that Oliver's story is not one about blame or pointing fingers, but in actual fact it's a story about lessons being learned and taken forward into your everyday practice. So let me start by telling you a little bit about Oliver and who he was. So from the moment Oliver was born, we knew that he was special and our love for him was simply overwhelming. Oliver was born a month premature and at 3 weeks of age he developed bacterial meningitis and he was very ill. And we were told by the doctors that they didn't expect him to recover. But he did. He began to recover. Now, everybody who came into contact with Oliver were drawn to him. And you know when you get that baby, you will have all come across one like that where you're just drawn to them and you can't leave them alone. And this was him in the hospital cubicle. And people being drawn to Oliver lasted throughout his whole life and even now in death. Sadly, Oliver developed a second episode of meningitis and again he was incredibly ill. But amazingly, against all odds and many months of hospital treatment, Oliver's strength and determination shone through and he survived once again. And as always with that beautiful heartwarming smile you can see behind me. Now as a result of an infarction, so a stroke caused by that meningitis, Oliver was left with a mild hemiplegia, so a weakness down one side, cerebral palsy. He had focal partial epilepsy and a mild learning disability. Later on he had a diagnosis of high functioning autism. Quite a lot really, isn't it? But in actual fact, Oliver's disabilities didn't hold him back and he had an absolute can-do attitude. And he simply amazed everybody with his achievements. Oliver was playing for England FA development football squads. He was a registered athlete. He was ranked third best in the country for track 200 metres. He was in training to become a Paralympian and his aspirations was to participate in the Special Olympics. Oliver was a natural leader and later on he became a prefect at school. He attained several GCSE and BTEC examinations and later on he went on to attend National Star College in Cheltenham. Now, their opinions of Oliver were very complimentary. They were writing how friendly and kind he was, supporting students who were far less able than himself. His wicked sense of humour, he had the most amazing, astute sense of humour. I mean, he just had us all in heaps of laughter. And they told us about the aspirations that they had for Oliver for starting a ski course in the local community. Now, when Oliver died, Oliver's course tutors took us to one side and they said, we need to pass this on to you. You won't know this. Oliver had started National Star College later on in the term. And when he got there, it's quite a frightening experience when you start later on. Everybody else is already there. But for Oliver, he gets there. And he meets a young teenager like himself who had cerebral palsy. And he was required to use a voice box. But because this young teenager wants to be seen as, he wants to be the same as everybody else, he wouldn't use that voice box. And Oliver spent half of a morning with him. Today's the anniversary, the 3rd year anniversary that we buried Oliver. And I am told that that young teenager is still using that voice box today. That's who this boy was. As you can see, that Oliver brought so much fun and happiness to our lives. He always saw the best in everything and taught us all how to look at things differently. He would always challenge subconscious bias and prejudices. And if he heard it or saw it, he would call people out on that. He never failed to light up the room with the sound of his laughter. He wanted to make everybody happy, and he absolutely certainly did his best to achieve that. Now, despite his limitations, he never whinged or complained or asked why me. He just accepted everything and got on with everything, and as always with that lovely courageous smile that you can all see there. His courage and enthusiasm was simply inspirational. Now, importantly, we were told by Oliver's neurologist that he had a full life expectancy. He would live an independent life, he would get a job, and he would probably require some support with things like money matters, bills and that type of thing. But in October 15, Oliver was admitted to a children's hospital, having what we, his parents, and the college staff recognised to be simple partial focal seizures. And for those that don't know epilepsy, because there's so many different versions of it, it's almost like an absence seizure, so Oliver was always fully conscious. And quite rightly, these seizures caused Oliver to be scared, frightened and confused. After several weeks of tests in this hospital, Oliver was discharged home. And for the first time in his life, he was given an antidepressant medication. But Oliver wasn't depressed. Oliver loved life, and life certainly seemed to love Oliver. But more importantly, Oliver was 17 at this point. He wasn't given any information on this SSRI, this sertraline actually. My husband's a senior officer in the Air Force, PhD. I'm educated. We weren't given any information either, and we weren't told what to expect. But once this medication was increased, it caused a change to Oliver's mood and increased his seizures greatly, which is a known side effect of these medications. And as a result of these seizures, he was admitted back to the same hospital in December 15. But this time, Oliver was given antipsychotic medication. Now, Oliver didn't have a diagnosis of psychosis or mental illness. Oliver had a diagnosis of hemiplegia, epilepsy, autism, and learning disability. We absolutely believe that these particular doctors, and I say these particular doctors because I know there are fantastic doctors and nurses that work within the NHS. Many of my friends and family members are doctors and nurses, so I talk about these particular ones. We absolutely believe that they were misunderstanding Oliver's normal autistic behaviours, especially when in sensory overload. Now, the effect of these antipsychotics on Oliver were absolutely catastrophic. Oliver's seizure threshold and agitation deteriorated, and we absolutely didn't recognise this once beautiful, vibrant young lad here. This is how Oliver normally presented. This is how he normally dressed. He was very, very proud. But we now had the Incredible Hulk. He was now jumping on tables. He's ripping his clothes off. He's biting his skin. He's pulling his hair out. Oliver was very proud of his teeth, and he would brush his teeth for 20 minutes every day. Part of his autism. It used to do our head in, quite frankly, to be honest. He's now trying to pull them teeth out. This is the reaction to these medications. And as a result of these behaviours, Oliver was held against his will under the Mental Capacity Act on a Section 2. And, we absolutely challenged this on numerous occasions. For us as a family, the only difference we could see was the drugs. You can see the size of me. I'd picked Oliver up from college and brought him to hospital in my mini car, an hour's drive away. So that was the level of the agitation when I brought him into hospital, given the medications and the absolutely contrast change. Thank goodness a psychiatric bed couldn't be found, and the doctors at long last, after 3 weeks, decided to listen to us. And they removed the antipsychotic medications, and within days Oliver's mood and seizure threshold returned back to normal, so much so he was discharged on Christmas Eve back into our care, back home. And the discharging consultant doctor wrote that in his opinion that Oliver was sensitive to antipsychotic medications. In April 15, Oliver was readmitted back into the same hospital, again having these simple partial seizures with the same presentations that he'd had throughout his whole 18 years. You won't believe this. The first thing that the hospital did was to give him antipsychotic medications again. Clearly, they'd not learned from their previous mistakes. We walked into Oliver's cubicle one day, and we found him having a dystonic reaction to those very medications. He had, it's what's called ocular gyrate crisis, and his eyes were rolled up to the back of his head, and his face was frozen, and he couldn't make it come down. And we said to the nurse in charge, as we always did, well, what medication is Oliver being given? And she said, haloperidol. And we said, well, how long's Oliver been left like this? And she said, 6 hours. I ask all of you, if you had have walked into any hospital and had a reaction to a medication, as Oliver did, would you be left for 6 long hours? No. The reason Oliver was left like that was because he had labels attached to his being, that being learning disability and autism. I heard the neurologist in the doorway say she believed it to be behavioural. After 6 hours, she realised it wasn't behavioural, and procyclidine had to be administered. It took 20 seconds for that medication to work. 20 seconds. He'd been like that for 6 long hours. Again, as a result of these medications, Oliver's mood and seizures changed significantly. He was now hallucinating. He was having up to 30 seizures a day, something we'd never seen happen before. Oliver's normal seizure threshold was 2 seizures a fortnight. He's now having 30 a day. He had problems urinating, extreme high blood pressure readings, sweating, all of which was linked to these medications. We absolutely strongly believe that the drugs were the cause of decline in Oliver's mood difficulties. And it was obvious that these particular doctors and nurses had little to no understanding of autism and how autistic behaviours could present in a person with ongoing seizure activity. Now, as I said before, when in seizure, Oliver was always fully conscious. And because he had no control of the seizures, they quite rightly caused him to be frustrated and scared. Oliver could have a whole conversation with you, and you would only know he was in seizure because you would notice you were having the same conversation twice. And the pupils would be dilated, or his cerebral palsy was very subtle, and you might notice the thumb would be turned in. And they were the only signs that you could see. And he said to me one day, Mum, he said, oh Mum, it's horrible. He said, it's really, really horrible. He said, it's like having thousands of wasps constantly going off inside your head. And remember I told you, Oliver wants to be seen as the same as everybody else. And he said, Mum, I've got to go to college and I've got to do my work. I've got to get along with my friends, and I've got to pretend everything's okay. And then when I've been to college, I've got to go and play for England, and I've got to follow direction and instructions. And if I get it wrong, Mum, I'm going to be kicked off the team. And then I've got to go and do my athletics. And if I don't perform to that standard, I will lose my place in the Special Paralympics. Can I ask all of you what that would feel like for you if you had this seizure activity that Oliver had described, and you had to, you have to liaise with your patients, your colleagues, you have to take telephone calls, and all your day-to-day work that you have to do. Would you be frustrated, agitated, probably scared? But would you be restrained for it? No, you wouldn't. Now, at my request, Oliver was transferred to a specialist adult hospital who I thought would have understood Oliver's epilepsy better. And Oliver he was provided with a letter stating his previous reactions to those medications. Oliver had never transferred from children's to adult services, even though that should have happened from the age of 14. That didn't happen. And, we didn't know what to expect with adult services, and it was very, very different. This hospital were incredibly intolerant of Oliver's autistic and learning disability behaviours. They had absolutely no understanding of sensory crisis or overload, and they absolutely refused to take any direction, first from Oliver himself, us as parents, but also the learning disability nurses. Sadly, the use of physical restraint was increased, with up to 8 members of staff being involved at a time. Now, Oliver was very laid back and very mild. He'd never had an altercation in school or college. He'd never had a detention. Oliver was a goody two-shoes. But now he's being restrained with up to 8 members of staff at a time. Suddenly he wasn't allowed any privacy with his personal care. In the children's hospital, he'd been allowed, in between seizures, to go to the local museum with the support of a nurse. And we were going to Casper's ice cream parlour. In between, now Oliver was being escorted to the toilet for a number 2 with 3 female staff stood over him. Gentlemen in this room, can I ask you what that might feel like for you if you wanted to do a number 2 and you've got 3 female staff stood over you the whole time? Ladies, can I ask you to consider what it might be like for you if you had 3 males stood over you? Would you deem that to be acceptable? But it was acceptable for Oliver because he had those labels attached to his being. He was suddenly now kept in a darkened room. He wasn't allowed out of the cubicle. And the whole time he had 3 members of staff sat around that bed. Oliver, I learned, much to my shame, I teach additional needs myself as a teacher. And as Oliver, he was 16, I learned during an appointment, things that caused Oliver anxiety, agitation, was doorways. It was called a hotspot. And that was because he was worried about who would come through that door, the unpredictability of it. And I explained this to the staff in that cubicle. I said, look, just be wary of opening and closing that door, especially when he's having seizures. And I monitored. In the space of half an hour, that door opened 20 times. Worse still, it was not for anything to do with Oliver. It was to pass information to each other and things like the laundry or cups of tea. And I just want you to think about that when you take that forward into your own practice about those doors opening. Is it necessary and is it relevant to the patient? If it's not, it shouldn't be happening. For the first time in Oliver's life, remember I told you Oliver didn't question or ask why. He just accepted everything. Oliver told me how scared the staff was making him feel. And much to my shame and much to my guilt, I have to live with this to this day. I was very aware of mother blame. And I didn't want to be seen to be siding with my son. And I sided with the doctors that day. And I ignored Oliver. And I knew what was happening to Oliver was very, very wrong. And I totally ignored Oliver's cries for help because I didn't want to be seen as that mother blame. It was incredibly unusual for Oliver to be saying he was scared. Oliver was again given different antipsychotic medications, and as a consequence of this, he was again detained against his will on a Section 2. But this time he was transferred to a specialist intensive care PICU hospital, so psychiatric hospital. But again, we wasn't given any information, and neither was Oliver, what to expect when you get there. Mental health had never crossed my pathway. I wasn't savvy. I didn't know anything about mental health. And we were terrified. We were absolutely terrified. And when we got there, You know, like I said, we weren't told what to expect. And when you get there, you get out of the ambulance, that's a secure unit type thing. And you go through the first door and it's all metal. And that door slams behind you like a prison. And you go in and all your possessions are taken off you. You as a visitor, everything goes, your bags, everything, your mobile phone. That door slams. And you go through the next door and you're given a walkie-talkie and you're told that's to protect you from the inmates. And then you go through another door and that's when you see your loved one. And what you see is a mattress on the floor, that's their bed. And you see a toilet that's really low on the floor. And you see something that looks like a hole coming down the ceiling because that's the shower. We were very, very, very lucky because Oliver, fortunately, being sent to a good unit. And the different approach from the skilled staff allowed Oliver to improve almost instantly. They were making reasonable adjustments for Oliver. And the words from the staff, including the doctors from the unit, were that Oliver was not psychotic and nor was he mentally ill, and that his placement there was a total misuse of the Mental Health Act. Remember, this is a specialist psychiatric hospital. These are the experts and this is what they're saying. They immediately reduced all antipsychotic medications, so much so Oliver was discharged after just a few days of their care home to us and under the help and support of a community learning disability team. We were told this was highly unusual because when you're in a psychiatric hospital intensive care, you don't come straight home. You have to go through the ward processes. But they felt so strongly about Oliver being there and him being wrongly there. Oliver now comes home to us almost immediately. The community learning disability team were incredibly supportive and they specialised in people who had autism and learning disabilities. Again, the community consultant psychiatrist in learning disability wrote that Oliver wasn't psychotic and nor was he mentally ill. So again, another specialist in the field are saying these things. He absolutely believed that Oliver's behaviours were a result of autism, a mild learning disability and a busy environment that was simply not adapted to meet Oliver's needs. It's important at this point that we all remember the Autism Act. And that Autism Act does say that every medical practitioner must make reasonable adjustments for people who have autism and learning disabilities. That is the law. In October 16, Oliver had a cluster of those partial seizures that I've explained, and he presented in exactly the same way as he always did. I was ready this time. We were absolutely terrified of Oliver having to go back into hospital again. And all of those essential letters that I've talked to you about, I put into a small folder. And I also presented a detailed hospital passport that explained Oliver's previous reactions to medications, his likes, his dislikes, how to de-escalate a situation. And I gave it to the nurse in charge and said, you know, Oliver's got autism. You will need to make reasonable adjustments. He's very scared. And I watched her put it in the drawer. We were lucky again-ish. The neurologist on duty that day was absolutely amazing. And he took the time to sit down and read all of those letters. And as a result of that, he wrote in bold red ink on the drug charts and on the medical care charts that Oliver, under the allergies box, that he was allergic, sensitive, intolerant to all antipsychotic medications. He then went one step further and sent an email round to all of the doctors treating him, and that email says that Oliver was intolerant to all forms of antipsychotic medications. Oliver was intubated, quite rightly so, to facilitate an MRI scan to investigate why Oliver was having these seizures. And as a result of that, he developed pneumonia, double pneumonia. You know, Oliver had never had a chest infection in his life. He'd gone into hospital with a temperature of 36.5 degrees. But, you know, we accept that. There are risks that come with intubation. Now, the safeguarding officer was consulted on how to manage Oliver's anxiety when sedation was reduced. And his advice to the doctors, based on Oliver's previous medical reactions and so on, was an absolute non-pharmacological pharmaceutical approach, and if necessary to use soft handcuffs. They were worried in case Oliver tried to extract those tubes. We were also told that just about 100% of the population will become anxious and agitated, waking up from sedation. The safeguarding officer then said we absolutely needed to be present to be able to reassure and comfort Oliver. Now, in the evenings, it was an adult hospital, we were sent home. And, you know, he's the baby of our family. He was my absolute world. He's got pneumonia. And I would phone, I was probably very annoying, probably got on the nerves. I don't care, he's my baby. And I was phoning at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I was phoning at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I was phoning at 6 o'clock in the morning to see how he was. I'm a mum. It's unbelievable that that sedation was reduced when we weren't there. Can you imagine what that would feel like for any one of you? Oliver didn't know he was going to be sedated, intubated. What would that feel like for any one of you waking up to find a tube down your throat? You can't breathe for yourself. You are now surrounded by professionals, doctors you don't recognise, all talking at once. You've now probably got machines going off left, right and centre. You are in a clinical room. Can you imagine how that would have felt for Oliver? How scared he must have felt. He would have been terrified. That was also the last opportunity I had to look my son in the eye and tell him that I loved him, that he was there for his seizures and that the doctors were trying to make him better. I never ever got to speak to my son again because that sedation was increased. We don't quite know because during the inquest there was lots of different stories as to why that happened. Now, we were consulted by a neuropsychiatrist who'd met Oliver for just 2 10-minute appointments in the community. And she asked us about giving Oliver an antipsychotic medication. You can absolutely imagine our reaction, can't you? I was like a child. I had those letters and I was giving them to her and saying, look, this is what the other doctors have said. You know, we made it clear about Oliver's previous reactions and we told her that she absolutely did not have our permission to administer any antipsychotic medications. And we told her that Oliver had made an advanced verbal decision in the ambulance. And he's also said the same thing in the A&E. The only reason we got Oliver into that ambulance that day was Oliver had said, don't give me antipsychotic medications. They mess with my eyes and they make they mess with my brain and make my eyes roll up. And Oliver was promised that he wouldn't be given antipsychotic medications. And that's how we got him in the ambulance. In A&E before intubation, he said exactly the same things. Oliver clearly had capacity to refer back to that ocular gyrate crisis back in the Children's Hospital. We couldn't have been clearer. That evening when we went home, Oliver was administered olanzapine, the very first antipsychotic he'd been given back in the Children's Hospital where he was ripping his skin. The next day when we found out he was on antipsychotics, I can still see it to this day, the 2 doctors. And we told them, you don't have our permission to administer this. But Oliver himself has made an advanced verbal decision not to be given it. And you promised him that it wouldn't happen. And I can still see to this day, the 2 doctors turned away and carried on talking. Over the next few days, Oliver developed a temperature of 42 degrees. Now, because doctors said his liver function was elevated, he wasn't given any medication to control that temperature other than a blow-up mattress filled with cold air. To me, as a non-clinician, it looked like a lilo. 42 degrees. His brain was frying the whole time. Now, doctors couldn't understand the decline in Oliver's condition as his pneumonia was now improving and he was requiring far less oxygen. And they sent him for a scan of his liver and lungs. Oliver was now having tonic-clonic seizures, and we were terrified because Oliver didn't have clonic-tonic seizures, and he shouldn't have been having them because he's intubated and he's on paralysis drugs, so he shouldn't have been able to move. In the lift for that MRI scan, we were told the lift had to be stopped. The seizure was so bad. And it was at that point we begged the doctors again, like children. And I was saying, can you do a scan of his brain at the same time while you're there? Because Oliver had lost most of the right-hand side when he'd had that meningitis as a baby. But remember, he'd passed his GCSEs and doing lots of stuff. He had a really good life. But the doctor said, the scores on the doors, the machines are showing us that Oliver's fine. Stop worrying. It's good. So we listened and we stopped worrying. That was on the Friday. On the Sunday, we came into the hospital and we were told by the ICU consultant who'd been reassuring this whole time, and he said, look, go for a coffee. We are just going to take Oliver for an MRI scan of his brain. We're just dotting the T's and crossing the I's. Don't worry about it. Now, we've since learned from the inquest it was because one of Oliver's pupils had stopped reacting. Now, my husband Tom said to me, look, Paula, I'm not worried. Don't worry, so long as we don't get sent into that side room where nobody ever wants to go. And when we came back from that coffee, we saw the consultant and he looked very embarrassed, concerned, and he was anxious. He was hopping around on one foot to the other, and he had a piece of paper in his hand. And he sent us into that side room that we didn't want to go in. And he said, you need to sign this form right now. If you don't, we need to insert a shunt. Oliver's going to die. His brain is so badly swollen, it's coming out the base of his skull. Then the neurosurgeons came in and they said to us, Oliver's got neuroleptic malignant syndrome, a direct side effect of those medications that Tom and I had been saying not to give Oliver. Never alone Tom and I, Oliver himself had been saying the same thing. I want you to look at Oliver now, not me. We were now told that Oliver's brain was so badly damaged that he would be profoundly disabled. There'd be no speech, no understanding of language, no way of communicating. He would be reliant on a tracheotomy, so a breathing machine, and would be tube fed for the rest of his life. Oliver was now paralysed. There'd be no more representing his country for football or athletics. That beautiful smile, that wicked, wicked sense of humour, those wise words of wisdom, they were gone forever. Oliver was silenced. A week later, the decision was made to turn Oliver's life support machines off. Now, we were told that Oliver would die quite quickly, and my husband Tom and I and my other two children, we pretended we were making this little scenario of putting Oliver to bed. In actual fact, he's in bed, isn't he? And we were saying our goodbyes. But Oliver refused to die. They told us he wouldn't survive without the tracheotomy. Oliver's now breathing for himself. And he was a trendy dude. He liked his trendy teenage music. And when I used to play James Arthur, Don't Let Go, Say You Won't Let Go, how poignant is that? He would open his eyes. And, when he was in seizure, I would massage his head and he would open his eyes. And when I'd put my hand in his, he seemed to try to put his hand around, or that's what it felt like to me anyway. But the doctors said it was all primitive. And because he was in palliative care, and probably the pneumonia was allowed to increase, Oliver was getting sicker and sicker. And he was now having myoclonic seizures, so where the brain is dying off. And it was horrific, because Oliver's whole face was distorted, so it wasn't a pleasant death. Oliver passed away several days later on Armistice Day, the 11th of November 2016, which is poignant to us because, given Oliver was a military child and had lived his whole life as part of the Royal Air Force family. Now, Oliver's life was a life wasted due to these particular doctors not communicating effectively with family and other practitioners who knew him well and were in daily contact with the hospital. We believe that these particular doctors were arrogant and they were ignorant, and they believed that they knew Oliver better than himself, but also us, his parents. They didn't consult wider when there was ample opportunity to do so. The learning disability team that I talked about earlier, the community team, they were coming in most days and they were trying to have their voices heard and tried to explain about Oliver. And we were told in the inquest that, well, they're community-based. We don't have to talk to them. We're acute. But they could have given so much information. Now, we've since been told by the doctor who administered the antipsychotic drug that she would have given it regardless of ours or Oliver's wishes, because it was in Oliver's best interest. She also said during the inquest that given the same situation again, she would do exactly the same thing again. Now, we understand that many people receive the medications that Oliver was given, often for managing a mental health condition, and they do so without suffering the effects that Oliver had. But in Oliver's case, I'm sure you all will all agree, we had clear understanding that he was sensitive to these medications, and we believe that they should never have been prescribed. We believe that Oliver's death was very preventable, and we believe that he was given excessive drugs due to medical staff not understanding autism impacted by seizure activity. They didn't know how, or they just didn't know how to try to adapt the environment to meet his needs. And I know that because during the inquest, that lovely, lovely neurologist, he was questioned as to why he didn't make reasonable adjustments. And he said, I've heard of them, but I don't really know what they are. And I don't blame him, because it's not his fault. He was not given the skills to enable himself to be able to help my son. Instead, they used excessive restraint methods. They absolutely failed to make any communication with community-based professionals who were working with Oliver on a daily basis and knew him well. Now, if the guidelines and principles from NHS England's STOMP project, which stands for Stopping the Over-Medication of People with a Learning Disability, STOMP or STAMP for children. Can you please put your hands up if you know if you've heard about STAMP? Oh my goodness. You've made me smile. Yes, this morning there was well over 200 people in the auditorium while I gave this presentation. 2 people put the hand up. Over this week and a half, I've presented to nearly 2,000 people, different trusts, different universities, different establishments. In total, there's been around about 12 people put the hand up. So you've absolutely warmed my heart, so thank you for that. Now, if this project had been followed with healthcare professionals being able to listen to family and specialist colleagues, then we absolutely firmly believe that Oliver would still be here today. We believe that Oliver's premature death should be in the public's interest, and today I challenge all of you as practitioners who will be supporting and treating people with a learning disability and or autism. Please ask people with a learning disability, autism or both, their families and carers for their opinions and concerns about their treatment. I know you know this stuff, but please remember, it's their treatment. You as practitioners are there to support them, but it's their treatment ultimately. And when you've asked people about their concerns, please listen to all involved and show respect to those opinions and concerns. It's important. And when you've listened, please do something about it and work in partnership with them. And specifically as people who provide care in learning disability and autism, and by the way, this is the responsibility of every single practitioner, not just the responsibility of the learning disability nurse. Because we have to remember, people with additional needs are human beings, and they get cancer, and they have heart conditions and diabetes, and the learning disability nurse may not always be there. So every practitioner needs to be able to understand how to support people with those additional needs and how to de-escalate their anxiety. Please make sure that you all understand the Mental Capacity Act, the Autism Act, the Human Rights Act, the Equality Act, because these are all laws for which every single one of you can be held accountable for if they are not followed. Remember to put people at the heart of all decision making, respect their point of view, and don't make decisions without them. Enable them to understand complex decisions in a way that is relevant to all and provide information and explanation that's accessible. Finally, please do everything in your power to prevent a story like Oliver's ever having to be told again. Do not ever have an Oliver Mcgowan on your conscience because you thought you knew better. Now, throughout my presentation, I've talked about reasonable adjustments an awful lot. Now, in an acute setting, we have to remember that a reasonable adjustment is exactly what it says on the tin. It's what's reasonable at that time. So there may not always be a quiet room available. It's a busy environment. So I'd like to do a short demonstration on what the most basic of reasonable adjustments should look like, and in actual fact that every single one of you should be doing every time. So can I have a volunteer, please? I don't bite. Come on, I'm small. Oh, come on then. You sit in this chair. Right. So, yeah, should we move away from that beam? Yeah. I don't really totally the other one, no. Never mind. So when Oliver was in A&E, he was sat on a bed, just like, well, you're on a chair, but he was sat on a bed. And you're lucky, you've only got me stood over you. Oliver had between 4 and 6 people over him. So, I'm a teacher, and I teach 5-year-olds. So what I want you to do is, I want you to go in, and I want you to teach my 5-year-olds phonemes, graphemes, digraphs, trigraphs, oral blending, segmenting, and I want you to do a baseline assessment and feed it back to me, okay? What's the matter? What's wrong?
I'm feeling anxious. I feel I've been put in a position.
Do you understand what I've just said? You understand my language? Are you impacted by autism, a learning disability, epilepsy? You're not, other than being put in front of everybody like this, you're not compromised in any way at all, are you really? Whose behaviour is challenging? Is it me, the practitioner, or is it the patient? Absolutely. If I continue intimidating you and standing in your face, what is the normal human reaction? What will you do?
I'm going to get angry.
And what are you going to do?
I'm either going to do flight or I'm going to do fight.
You can't fly anywhere because you've got security staff. She's going to push me, isn't she? She's just pushed me. We're going to get diagnostic overshadowing now. She's come in with a seizure. What's she going to be labelled with now? She's got challenging behaviour. Is it likely to be psychiatric now?
Yes.
Yeah. She hasn't got a psychiatric condition. My behaviour has challenged the patient. What's going to happen to her? She's just pushed me over. She's pushed me out of the way. What's going to happen? She's going to be physically or chemically restrained. Who's got the worst health care outcomes now because of my behaviour? I'm going to show you the most reasonable of adjustments. So, first of all, don't worry. Don't worry. All I want you to do is I want you to go in and teach my 5-year-olds how to read. I'm going to be stood outside that door. So if there's a problem, just come and get me or send one of the children out. You're going to hear words like phoneme. That is just the name of a letter or a sound. So A, B, P, all those type things. You will hear things like digraph. That's 2 letters that make one sound. So an I and an E together make the sound I. A trigraph is 3 letters that make one sound. IGH, I. Oral blending is how you sound out a word. So the word back would be back. Again, you've got that digraph at the end, a C and a K with the sound K. Segmenting, break up a big word. Just big words that we use. I want you to do baseline assessment. I'm going to give you a list of words and I just want you to tick them off, what they know, and just bring it out to me. Like I said, I'm just there. How are you feeling now?
I understand. Information's very clear.
So,
I'll be able to carry out that.
okay, so what did they do that was different?
Stick to the patient's level.
I'm right down on your level. I've treated you as an equal. What else?
Reassurance.
Reassurance. Oliver was never ever reassured. Nobody thought to reassure Oliver ever. There's things that we should always do. What else have we done?
And checking out for understanding.
processing what she understood. Yeah. I've simplified my language, I've modified it, I made it more accessible, and I've checked that you've understood what I was saying. And I've made the most basic of reasonable adjustments. Did that take any length of time to do that? Not really. But in actual fact, the outcome would be hugely different. Thank you so much. Now, I am very active on Twitter, and trying to dodge the light. The autistic community have embraced me, and they've taken me into their lives really in lots of ways. Now, what I have found is that the autistic community is very varied, and we have lots of professionals who have autism as well, very academic people, doctors, nurses, actually, engineers. And I asked them what reasonable adjustments could look like for them going into any medical setting. And I have to say, much to my shame, I thought, they're a feisty bunch. They will ask for the world. Subconscious bias. I want you to look at this video, and I was so humbled and ashamed. These are their actual words. Quite humbling, isn't it? Quite sad that people feel, tell me before you touch me. Don't inject me without telling me first. It's just basic. People are not treated as human beings. They're not treated as equals. That resource is available on Oliver's webpage, so olivermcgowan.org, alongside lots of other this stuff. Now, at the very start of my presentation, you had the BBC News clip, and it talked about me having a petition debated in Parliament. When Oliver died, my husband and I, we moved to Australia after the inquest. And I don't really have much to do with government, if I'm honest. I'm not that savvy. And for some reason, I sat down one day, and as I've said, I've talked about, I just felt it wasn't fair that our doctors and nurses are not given those skills. I personally couldn't go and fix a car. Why would we expect our practitioners to suddenly know how to support people with additional needs, autism, learning disability, if you haven't got the skills? So, for some reason, I suddenly knew how to start a petition, a government petition, and that was successfully debated cross-party in Parliament. And as a result of this was announced 2 weeks ago, around about.
People with learning disabilities and autistic people deserve the very best treatment and care that we can provide. We need to do it better. That's why the government have announced that every NHS and social care worker will now receive mandatory training on learning disability and on autism, helping to improve the quality of care provided across the health and care service. Now, we know the number of people who live with a learning disability who die avoidably each year remains far, far too high. And I'm confident and hopeful that this new training will go a long way to help keep people better cared for and safe. It's unacceptable that the lives of autistic people or those with a learning disability could be cut short because of barriers in accessing healthcare that most of us just take for granted. So this package of measures will be backed by £1.4 million and will ensure that NHS staff and social care workers are equipped with the confidence and skills to fully understand individuals' needs. Our consultation listened to the views of over 5,000 people, including charities, patient groups, professional bodies and individuals who overwhelmingly backed this initiative. They really felt that it would make a difference. This training will focus on teaching staff to understand the particular nuances of learning disability and autism, how to make reasonable adjustments, such as maybe using different communication methods for autistic people with sensory sensitivity. I would like to pay a special thanks to Paula Mcgowan, who has campaigned tirelessly for this training to become a reality following the tragic death of her son Oliver. She's given a voice to many people who aren't always able to speak up for themselves. And in Oliver's honour, we are going to be naming the training after him. So thank you, Paula, for your ongoing dedication and your commitment to this important cause.
Thank you. I told you, didn't I? People were drawn to him throughout his whole life. And even in death, they're still drawn to Oliver. We're going to go to quick question answer. Is that right, Daniel?
Yes.
Question answer now, if we want, before we end on the final clip. So if there's any questions, but before those questions come, remember Oliver's campaign is not one about blame. It's about learning lessons. So we need to be mindful of that, please. I can hear you.
Is it working? Right. Hi there, Mark Sheeners, consultant in learning disabilities. And thank you very much for your sharing your story this evening with us. In relation to you might be more privy to it than we are there any particular standards that are going to be attached to the training? Because working in an NHS as I do and being very well aware of how people operationalise rollout of new programmes, I'm concerned that I wouldn't want a programme such as this to be just done in a tokenistic way.
No, it's not.
So are there any sort of standards of training that are going to be rolled out? Because what I wouldn't want to see is there's real pressures on statutory mandatory training schedules within organisations, and you wouldn't want it to end up being just a tick box.
Absolutely not.
So I'm just suppose seek a little bit of reassurance here.
No, that's okay. So it's going to be built on, Daniel, you can help me out with this a bit. It's going to be built on the disability framework, the standards.
So it's going to be built on the 3 tiers of the HE, the Health Education England core skills framework around learning disabilities, and the autism one as well. So yes, it's going to be built around those things, but now is a time to be getting involved in those kind of pieces of work to ensure that we make them as least tokenistic as possible.
It's going to be a common curriculum. I thought really hard for everybody to... I want to know that everybody across the country is getting the same standard of training. It's going to be in 3 tiers. Tier 1 is going to be rolled out in January, and that will be an e-learning package. Not a fan of it, but that is for people who don't have face-to-face contact with people with additional needs. Then Tier 2 will be face-to-face training. And we don't know what that content is properly yet, but it will be delivered face-to-face and it will be given in a timely way. Tier 3 is for specialists, and they will receive a more specialised training. In actual fact, I believe that Tier 2 and 3 should be swapped over. If you're a specialist, you should know this stuff. So it's going to be... we've got the pilot schemes ongoing at the moment. That will start in January again, is that right?
Where are the pilot sites?
Sorry?
Where are the pilot sites?
We haven't been told yet, and that is where the 1.4 million is headed for.
Right.
Yeah, that's going for that. But it's up to all of us. We all have a responsibility and a duty to keep an eye on that training. I will certainly be keeping an eye, and to make sure it's fit for purpose. And if it's not, then you owe it to yourselves as practitioners, but also to the very people that you're supporting, to actually speak out and say something about it.
So will the people who are delivering the training currently, I'm thinking of the acute liaison nurse, LD nurses in the hospitals, for example, will they be adopting this training and adapting it, or will this be training that's undertaken by a different body?
We haven't been told yet. There's going to be several bodies, and that's being developed by NHS England and Education. Is that right? Do you know more?
So at this stage, we're still in that pilot stage. It's quite possible that the liaison nurses, that the learning disability nurses that are in those kind of organisations, it will fall to them. But essentially, it will fall to the education leads first, and then it will be operationalised in each organisation.
We've not been told any of that yet. We don't know, is the answer, really.
Yes.
Will the training be offered to private providers as well?
At this moment in time, it's for NHS and social care.
Yes, my name is Christina Gardner. My brother had learning disability. I just wanted to ask, will it be extended, for instance, to more fields that aren't hospital? Because there are issues, I know, with people with learning disabilities losing their sight much earlier than anybody else.
So, at this moment in time, that is ideal, but it is for NHS employed staff and social care. Yep. At this moment in time.
Yeah, hi. I've got 2 points around the clinical culture, hospital environments. One is, and it's directly connected to autism and disabilities in those environments. And one is snapshot diagnoses, in that clinicians and nurses, the only place they see these people are in those environments. And so they're only going to react to you in a certain way. But unless you know the continuum, it's very difficult to understand what goes on outside those very intimidating walls. The other thing is, which is an issue, is basically challenging the medical profession, and that is a culture that starts in medical school, and it's a problem.
Julian, can I just hold you there a minute?
Just those 2 are the main ones.
Yeah. So let me reassure you, this training will be starting with undergraduates, and in actual fact, the professional bodies are embracing this. So we will start to get that change in culture.
Yeah.
And subconscious bias, which every human being has subconscious bias, all of us.
Yeah, I do know that for students in medical school, it's mandatory that the thing is, it's not mandatory for GPs that have already got their medical degrees.
But it will be.
It will be, and this is going to be one of the changes with this. This
Yes,
is the
it
most
will be.
important change. Because the other thing is that there are regulations, there are SOPs out there in NICE that are in print, online, but the problem is, how do you get them to read it? And the things with the mandatory training, that's why it's so important. The information is there, it's actually making sure that they really...
Remember NICE's guidelines?
Sorry? That's what I
NICE's
mean.
guidelines.
Yes, all those, yeah.
This is different. It's mandatory. And it will be delivered face to face. And like I said, we don't know what that content is yet. We do know it will cover the laws of the land. And like I said, it's up to every practitioner, because it is for you guys as well to actually speak out and say, I'd like to know more, or in actual fact, this is not fit for purpose. It's not delivering what it needs to deliver to me to enable me to be a better practitioner. You know, we've got to remember, Julian, we're all human beings at the end of the day, and people do not go into this profession to get things wrong. Things just get lost along the way, and we're all here to try to learn from that. So that's got to be a positive.
I think it's because things are so hectic in the NHS.
But that's a different thing altogether, isn't it? We've got to remember there's lots of really good people working for the organisation that are really trying their best to make those changes happen.
I think once people have gone through the mandatory training before, it'll be interesting to see how they see it as a priority, where it comes down the list of things they have to do providing for a patient. So it'll be very interesting before and afterwards how they see that as a priority.
I think you're right. I think one of the really important things is the partnership with education, and how we can support with evaluation of these kind of initiatives. And I think that's a really, really important thing. Yes, we can take big macro kind of evidence like life expectancy and those kind of things, but actually really getting down and dirty with practitioners, and to explore with frontline staff as to how they have seen the power of that training, and how they have experienced working with people with learning disabilities differently, I think is going to be really powerful. Has anybody else got any questions? Yes, Vicky.
Thank you so much, Paula. My name is Vicky Stobart, and I've been a learning disability nurse for 26 years, I'm very proud to say. And in 2004, we published a report for the National Patient Safety Agency that looked at diagnostic overshadowing, and it looked at use of antipsychotic medication, and it's been a real theme, and so I'm really delighted to see the mandatory training. And I think this will really make a difference. And just last week, my role currently is Director of Clinical Integration. I work in an acute and a community trust, and I do a lot of work with GPs. And just last week, the GPs were saying, we just haven't had the training.
Yeah.
We want to have the training.
Yeah, exactly.
We want to do this. And some of them didn't know about the mandatory training. So
Yeah.
I think it's really welcome. And likewise,
I would agree.
consultants in the acute, it's not because they don't want to give the best care. And so it really resonated with me that people don't come to work to do a bad job.
No, they don't.
They really come to work to do their best. And so thank you.
You're absolutely more than welcome, and that has been my take. So I've worked with a lot of professionals, and lots of professionals have contacted me, and that's where my passion has come from at the start of the journey, because this has only been happening for, I don't know, 14 months. It was this realisation that the professionals weren't given the skills that you needed, and I just felt it was so wrong, and not fair either. Because in actual fact, when things go wrong, like Oliver, who gets the blame? And in Oliver's case, it's a very different thing. There's lots of other things and issues going on there. But ultimately, that guy, the neurologist, who I have a lot of respect for, if he knew how to make reasonable adjustments, he definitely would have done. And he has to...
The way really is through support and through learning, and to not have blame.
Do you know, today I was quite impressed. I met, I can't remember the ladies' names, so it was student nurses here, wherever we went. Don't know where I've been today.
Kingston Hill.
Kingston Hill. And they were talking about a buddying system. And I didn't quite understand what they were meaning. But in actual fact, what they've been doing, and this is fantastic, and if any of you can get to do this, please embrace it.
It's us
Come on down, come and explain. If you can do it in 2 minutes, come and explain. Well, there you go. You didn't expect me to call you out today.
Hi, thank you. Hi, my name is Shane. It's a group of us from Kingston University. Started with our associate professor there, Teresa Nash. So basically, we've got a buddy program at Kingston University, and we buddy up with people with learning disability. We've got events going throughout the year. Last year, we did an event with Ham House, with the National Trust, and we were able to cater for 120 people with disability, learning disability, and just do different activities with them. For the day, we're not student nurses, we're just people like everybody else, and we just get to know each other as individuals. And then we've got like the singing project. I'm a part of the singing project itself. We've got workshops, rehearsals, and next week, Tuesday the 10th, we'll be having a performance at the House of Compassion, somewhere in Ditton. I'm not sure where that is. So we're looking forward to that. And then in the midst of everything, getting to know these young people. They're from a special needs school called St. Philip's Secondary School in Chesington. And so we're able to get to understand them, interact with them, try to activate change in the hospital and in the community, and just being able to learn new skills. Or some of the students from the special needs school, they're also teaching us Makaton. So for us, that I'm an adult student, so I was unaware of Makaton. And throughout the buddy program, we've got student nurses in adult, mental health, learning disability, and child nursing. So it's a nice group where we can learn from each other and balance and just get to make some form of change and difference.
And it will make a difference. They're going to be able to change their own subconscious biases, what they thought before. They're working with people who've got additional needs, and while they're having a lovely time by the sound of it.
Yeah, we do have a lovely time because, yes we do, because at first, to be honest, it's like we do have like a stereotype of what a person with learning disability may look like or how they may react. And on the day, from my own experience, I was like, okay.
It's good.
And it's like before, Teresa gave us like a reflection of what's our understanding and how our communication with a person with learning disability was. And then after the event, we were able to reflect on it and see what has changed from then to now. What can we bring forward? You know, what we can learn from each other. And it's like, for most of the people with learning disability on the day, they didn't really want to do any activities. They just wanted to just be out in the sunshine, not feeling isolated, because apparently there's a lot of social isolation around people with learning disabilities. Sometimes they don't get to go out as much throughout the year. Sometimes, apparently, it's just one time for the year. Sorry. So.
Look what, can you imagine if every medical practitioner, thank you, if you had can you imagine if every one of our nurses was going and getting those experiences across the country, the difference that would make? Can you imagine if our doctors and GPs and everybody else just spent one day, I know your programs are so tight, a week, more than that if you could. Can you imagine the difference that would make? Are we going to do any more questions, or are we going to end on the last clip?
Have we got any more? Yes, Joe.
Because 4.4 million, great amount of money, not going to go far.
It's for the pilot schemes, Joe.
Oh yeah, so really embedding it in every aspect of every education, the doctors and nurses of every is kind of one of the next phases through. And that's the important bit, isn't it?
Well, it's what happens next, isn't it? Let's be honest. I mean, for me, when I was part of the consultation, I wanted the face-to-face training, but I wanted also for staff to be able to talk in a safe environment where they can talk about different scenarios, where they might talk about a patient who's been in A&E that was challenging, and they might, in a safe environment, be able to say, well, I got this wrong, I didn't know what to do. And then somebody else can come in and say, well, would this have worked? So it's an open-ended discussions that enables people to learn from different scenarios and different situations. That's what I want to see happen. But I understand about the money. But it's up to us guys, isn't it? We've all got to open our mouths and say something. Daniel.
Yes.
All I ask for is that as a community learning disability is for clinicians to listen to the families. Like I get frustrated when they ignore parents and families about their child or young person or adult with learning disability or autism. Is that going to be in the training?
In all fairness, we would like to think every practitioner has that in their training right now. It really isn't it?
You were ignored though.
Of course, and so many others like me.
And you had doctors on your side. They wrote on the prescription card the allergies.
It's called subconscious bias and overshadowing.
Even though it was on the allergies on the hospital
I know.
passport, that's what's so galling.
I know. I know. And there are investigations going on into Oliver's death. But Oliver was the most caring, giving person, and he was never bitter. And I refuse to be bitter about what's happened to Oliver. And I know there are lots of fantastic practitioners, and I want to work together. Like I said, never to have an Oliver Mcgowan cross pathways again. We will never change the older people who are maybe stuck in their ways, but we can change along the way. I mean, what can I say to all of that? You're right, I know. Oliver should be alive today, surfing on Merriweather Beach in the water like the rest of us. But I have to be Oliver's voice now. And I think that brings it nicely to the end right now. I'm going to show a clip to you. You might need your tissues ready, actually. Remember I said Oliver was a trendy dude, and he was. He was really into his music. When Oliver died, I hadn't realised that he was a blogger. He had 7,000 followers on Twitter. Didn't know till after he died. He was just down with the kids. And he used to play James Arthur music and all the other stuff that I don't even know because I like Celine Dion. And he used to take the mick out of this song with his sister. When Oliver died, Heather put this video of photographs together of Oliver. And put it to this song. Listen to the words in this song. The photographs show you Oliver as a person, how real he was. Take Oliver in your hearts today, look at these and listen to what the words are saying to you. Oliver wasn't heard in life, and I hope now he's heard in death. So, thank you everybody.
Paula, on behalf of everyone, that was a really moving and inspiring talk. I mean, all of us here in this room today, I've noticed on that very beginning where we saw the charts, we have people from the public, we have people who work in learning disability, nursing and healthcare, and we have those who are working in different fields of practice but have come here today to hear your story. So can we actually give Paula a round of applause, please? I also have a few thank yous for other people, but I just wanted to say a few words, really. I mean, I am a learning disability nurse by background. I started there when I was 18 years of age, and I'm still in it today. I've got a much broader portfolio, but one thing that always amazes me about the field of learning disability, nursing in particular is where I'm coming from, is that we have so much to give, but also so much to learn. And we can actually pass on our knowledge. I'm just looking at this banner here. I didn't even know it was going to be here. And I'm going to blow our trumpet because it's an important aspect. We actually provide a School of Nursing here at Kingston St George's. We are viewed across London as #1. We win many awards, and we actually are seen, if you like, as a place of reputation. Now, that's not because we're anything really different. It's just that we're really compassionate and committed practitioners who actually want to ensure that we can pass on knowledge to the next generation. And the only way we can really do that is bringing people like yourself and Oliver into our teaching, into our learning, so that people can see from an emotional level what it is really like to learn from errors, mistakes, and we should never take it for granted to be complacent or actually arrogant in terms of our practice. And it can be so easily done with that. But also within learning disability nursing, we pass on so much knowledge in other ways. So what I picked up today, I'm just aware that what we're doing at the moment within the school and the faculty is that we're actually going in for an Athena Swan Award. An Athena Swan Award, for people who know it, is around equality, it's about rights, it's about actually trying to respect people, understand how we operate within an organisational culture. And whilst it's not identical, there was lots of parallels in there that I was actually aware of. And for me, it's about reasonable adjustments, it's about listening to each other, it's about understanding. You know, we are a workforce that's got caring needs. We care for people with our own children that's got learning disability needs or disabilities, older people, and all of those things come in, and about understanding that if we as a practitioner can care for each other, we can also transform that into our organisational culture and into the practitioners that we educate and train. And so therefore, to me, there was a really natural link. And that's what I believe in the field of learning disability. We have worked and we learn about how disadvantaged people are, and also how awful some of those experiences can be. And actually, we just need to be able to stay on top of that and remember. So thank you very much. That was very well received by someone like myself and also the audience. I'd also like to thank Martina, our actual president of the Nursing Society, and also proud that she is a learning disability nurse too and representing that profession. Thank you. It was a great start to the event. Also, I'd like to, these two ladies down here, these things don't just happen. They actually come together with lots of work and lots of organisation. So we have two people. We've got here's Safira, who's actually our marketing manager and actually markets it and does all the flyers and so forth, but communicates with you out there so that you know what's going on here within the university. And we've also got here, I've forgotten the name. Anastasia, sorry, I've got too many names going on. I'm thinking about the next name. Anastasia, who actually is our events manager and who works really behind the scenes very, very hard, organising the catering, organising the invitations and so forth. A job that I don't want to do and I couldn't stand it, but she does a great job, so thank you very much. I'd also like to thank Daniel here as well, who's sitting here, look, doing all the work here, but a great ambassador for tonight who's also worked very much around coordinating this and making this event happen, but very much in partnership with Paula. It was about Paula's event, it was about Oliver, but it was also about us working together to actually educate all of us. So thank you very much, and thank you all for coming this evening. Thanks.